The U.S. men's national team has drastically improved in terms of youth development the past 20 years, like a lot, but it still feels like we have not reached our potential. So will we ever reach this so-called potential? What do we have to do to reach it? Hi, if you're new here, I'm Filippo, and welcome to Tactical Manager TV, and welcome to another channel, two episode mini series. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about U.S. soccer youth development. Now, keep in mind, for this mini-series, every time I mention U.S. soccer, I'm specifically referring to the U.S. men's national team for these segments, because obviously when I say U.S. soccer, it can mean the U.S. men's national team and the U.S. women's national team, but here I am referring exclusively to the men's program only. Keep that in mind. For this episode 1 of 2 in this mini-series, I will have Brian Kleiban for both of them, who has worked with the LA Galaxy Academy and is heavily involved with youth development in the United States. Plus, I am putting his YouTube channel and Twitter handles on the description, so go check it out. Episode 2 of the series will be out later this week, and it'll be focused on U.S. soccer culture. That said, enough of me talking. Okay, Brian, welcome to the channel. Before we even start, can you quickly tell everyone where you worked, where you currently work, just so they know that you are actually involved with youth soccer here in the United States?
Yeah, man. Hi, Filippo. Thanks for having me again, man. Yeah, it's been a long journey, 20 some odd years from the coaching perspective, at least 40 plus years from the soccer perspective, born and raised. Like, man, I wore this specifically for you today. I don't know if you could get the 3 stars for you, Filippo. All right. We're not at 5 yet. Hey, we're not at 5 yet, but that's 2002. That was once upon a time. Soccer has no memory. I was 20 years old.
I'll tell you one thing. Brazil and the U.S. combined have 5 World Cups. The U.S. and Argentina combined have only 3. So I know which country I'm choosing there. Brazil and the U.S.
We're living in the present. But no, I hope we can have a serious conversation where the U.S. is actually contending. You know what I mean? So to answer your question, I was involved with the Galaxy Academy, right? All the way, almost the inception of a program they started when I arrived, which was the high school program. A lot of contact hours with the players, allows you to develop the players further. We'll talk about that in the segment. Before that, it was Chivas USA, which is now a non-existent club. Many may know, others may not. So there was a Chivas USA MLS franchise here in Los Angeles, which was replaced by LAFC later. I was there for 3 years as well. And then prior to that, a bunch of the youth soccer clubs here in Southern California, kind of honing my craft, getting better. And then making that jump to the MLS youth level. Currently, I'm at a club called LAFC SoCal Youth, which is kind of a feeder system club. It used to be one of the top tier clubs here in Southern California. It used to be called Real SoCal, and now it's kind of like a feeder system to LAFC. So I'm working with some players there in that club now.
So with that said, I also worked here in Orlando with Orlando City a little bit in their soccer school for about a year and a half or so. And I have a company here too, working with youth soccer, right? So one thing I want to talk about here is the United States has improved, obviously, the past 20 years in terms of player development. If we go back to the 90s, 2000s, there's definitely an improvement. The players are better, but it always feels like we're never reaching the potential of the country, right? Our country seems to have more potential in terms of, talent that we have in sports in general, infrastructure, everything. And there's many issues we can address here in regards to pay to play, having an open or closed system that would allow to have more clubs and more academies. But I want to talk about a little bit about player development here in the United States. And I had a take here the other day on Twitter, and some people agreed, some disagreed. And this is how I looked at it, and I want to get your take on it. I think that from ages 14 and above, development of players in the United States is pretty good or good enough to compete with top teams in the world. The problem is reaching that 14 age, the U14, right? That's what I'm trying to say. The U14, the players don't come as developed. There's no pickup culture. I think we lack youth soccer coaches at those ages, U12, U10. There's almost no futsal culture here too, which improves player development in terms of like technical ability. Do you agree with that? That from the problem nowadays is from the U14 and below, or not?
It's weird, Filippo, because being immersed in it, I was kind of from the opposite take, where I thought at nines, tens, 11s, 12s, from my experiences taking young teams like that to compete in Europe or compete against high level teams, we were on par. And then we would take a massive dive with the player quality once it got to the higher ages, 14, 15, 16, 17, because the elite level players, the experiences that I had, it was in the time where Thiago Alcantara was a 15-year-old Barca Youth Academy player. And I saw Thiago. And I saw what I had over here. And it was comparable in terms of technique, skill level, soccer IQ. But then Thiago was playing U19 football as a 15-year-old for FC Barcelona or Barca B. And my guys were playing Mickey Mouse, Orange Soccer Club weekend tournaments against scrubs. So the disparity was crazy after a couple of years. But to your point, I think you're onto something, that there's not age group specialists at the younger ages. There is zero. This is something that I heard you talk about yesterday, zero pickup culture, which we're not going to have world-class talents. We're not going to have Viniciuses that can just receive the ball, and they've done it since they were kids. They played on the playgrounds. Nobody instructing them. Just glide by people effortlessly. Yeah, we have Christian that does it here and there, but we should have countless Christians and countless prospects like Vinicius, and we don't. We have, and I was talking about it with some of my colleagues recently, all players now, my opinion, and some of my colleagues that work at the pinnacle now in youth soccer, they're like, every player is technically proficient now when they arrive at the academies because of private trainings, because a lot of them do play futsal, at least here in Southern California, a lot of them do play futsal, the youth players. So they arrive at the academies technically proficient, but they're all the same, Filippo. It's your all cookie cutter. They could turn, they could play a 7-yard pass, they could play 2-touch, but they're not different. They're not special. And that comes from what you said. No pickup culture, no age group specialist. Everything's too, it's like a
robotic.
Robotic. But it's a catch-22, Filippo, because I feel like our coaching education has gotten a lot better. People are stepping outside of the box. People are wanting to go to Europe and top clubs, South America, and immerse themselves and learn, where 20, 30 years ago, at least when I grew up here, that didn't exist. Everybody had their own concepts. They were at the ground level, and they thought they knew what was going on. They didn't want to get any type of formal education outside the state. So a lot of people are doing this now. There's like this French course that I'm sure you're familiar with. They go to Clairefontaine, then they go to top clubs around Europe, be it Bilbao or Monaco or wherever, to learn. And then, not your classic USSF E license or D or C. You're learning from people that have done it for a long time and have a successful formula. So the problem, Filippo, and talking to some of my colleagues, and we agree to disagree on a lot of things, but we all agree on this, is now every coach now comes back and has their tactic board and wants to have their game model and their principles. When you create robots at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, no one makes their own decisions. There's no special players. There is no, and I watch MLS Academy games now, there's no special Gio Reyna. The Gio Reyna would do whatever the fuck he wanted to as a youth player, and now we see what's happening today too, okay? And that makes him special. That makes him different. He has that swagger. He doesn't give a shit. Efra, who just scored a slalom goal the other day for the Galaxy, say what you will, he hasn't blown up yet. He hasn't done what he's potentially could do, but it's a special, unique talent. You don't see that anymore. I go and I watch games and everybody's the same player.
You mean more towards US, right? Because you do see it worldwide. You just talked about Vinicius.
Here domestically. Here.
Yeah, that's one thing so I think there's two different issues to tackle. I do think a lot of the American players do lack technical ability in tight spaces. You talked about futsal there in California, for example. Maybe there we have it, but it's not adopted in a mass scale, right? I personally thought every single MLS club should have U10 and U12 futsal academies, and the players can transition because they get developed on the technical level they develop. And once they get to the field, you can quickly show them position. They'll learn and they'll play field. That's easy. And they watch games, so they're aware. So I thought every MLS club should be obligated to have a U10, U12 academy. The players from a technical standpoint would grow. Now, yes, to your point about creativity, flair, that you don't really teach, right? You don't coach that. You just the kid just plays so much pickup, and then he sees Ronaldinho do something. He tries to copy it. He sees even Christian Pulisic pull a trick and he tries to copy Pulisic, any players. And then you start to become creative, right? Anyone that played, it could be from Mexico, from South America, even the US, anyone that played soccer as a kid with pickup, and I grew up with that, you would know that, right? You're trying to copy Cristiano, you're trying to copy Messi, and I mean, most of us are not going to be able to copy them, but some will, and those are going to make it perfect or make it more perfect than it is, and that's how it improves. So I think there's two problems from what you were talking about there. One is there doesn't seem to have an actual structure for player development in the US, right? Like I just said, like let's say MLS or US soccer says, hey, for you to be the first division of the United States, all your clubs need to have U10, U12, futsal academies, and then U14. Some MLS clubs didn't even have academies not so long ago. Minnesota, they have one, or they didn't, and then now they have.
Now I think they do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, and then you go towards territorial rights in MLS, which kind of hurts it because you want to have these clubs competing for the best players. But here's my question to you. Let's talk about what you said, because I think this is one thing the US does miss. We do need a player, like you said, like Vinicius, that is a showman. He puts on a show and people fall in love with the game because of these players. How do we change that? How do we get a pickup culture here among youth players, not adults? I'm sure you have your pickup games. I have mine. How do we get it among kids here? Because we do see that in the US, and anyone that says it, we do see that from a basketball standpoint. And that's why we're one of the best in the world. Well, we are the best in the world in basketball. How do we change that? Do you have any ideas or suggestions?
I mean, back to futsal really quick. I remember when I was at Chivas, US Soccer tried to mandate that, like a U14 futsal season in the winter time across the whole US Development Academy. I don't know if you remember that. That must have been like 6, 7 years ago. That lasted one
I was
season.
too young.
It lasted one season, and then for whatever reason, it was eradicated. I think it was all the pushback from the clubs themselves saying, "Hey, this is costly. You know what I mean? We have to go and rent out futsal facilities. We got to do it." So they were taking a hit monetarily, and they're like, "What do we gain from it?" Instead of thinking on the long-term development of the player, you know how it is here. Everything's about the dollars and cents. So I think, or I speculate, that's the reason it got eradicated really quick. Pickup culture, man. I don't know if we can duplicate it. I don't know. I don't know if there's a solution. I know some of my former players, my first teams that I coached that are in their early 30s now, they started doing it. Like they have a warehouse, and instead of training their players, boys, girls, they just, here we go from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Come. It's pickup ball. Parents, leave your kids. You can stay. You do it. It's $5 each. They pick their teams. Who's got next? Go one goal games. And yeah, man, that's where you can express yourself. There's no coaching. There's no one telling you what to do. That's the only way. As you were talking, Felipe, I'm laughing because when we were kids, my brother, my best friends, his friends, mostly of Hispanic descent, but there's Jamaican guys. There was a Korean guy. They would come to a park across the street from my house, and we would call it Centenario. Don't ask me why we call it Centenario, the Uruguay
100
Stadium.
years?
Yeah. Don't ask me why, but we call it Centenario, the Uruguay Stadium in Montevideo. And okay, hey, what day we doing Centenario? They'd come over, and we'd watch Bebeto in '94 World Cup do a chip goal, and you want to be Bebeto. I'm Argentinian, and you saw the technique. You go and you practice the technique. So we don't have it, dude. We don't have it. I don't know how to correct it. To
Brian, do you want to know? This is a story that something that. So I lived in the U.S. when I was 4 to 7. Then I went back. We moved back, my family, to Brazil, and then we came back to the U.S. in 2010 when I was like 14, 15, something like that. I don't remember right now the exact age. And one thing that shocked me was when I was in Brazil, middle school, right? High school I did here in the U.S. Kindergarten, first grade, I believe it was in the U.S. And then middle school in Brazil and elementary, and then high school here. So in Brazil, we would play soccer at the beach, street. We'd always have so many friends wanting to play it. And of course, you come to the US, soccer is not as popular as it is in Brazil. So I didn't expect to be able to find a lot of pickup games like I do in Brazil. So far, so good, right? Because I don't want to put unrealistic expectations here. But here's the thing. I had a high school soccer team, which means I had friends that played soccer, right? All these guys in the high school team obviously play soccer. And we had a roster of probably 30 players, something like that, 25, 30 make the team. And what shocked me the most was we would practice during the week. And then, for example, we had a Facebook group at the time. Yeah, people still use Facebook back then. Even I don't even know if they still use it. And we made a Facebook group with all the players, and there was more than 30 because we also put some of the good JV players. And what shocked me was we had a beautiful field, a tremendous field that was not being used, and we could use it for free. And you would struggle to get like 14 players. And to me, that was mind blowing because I'm okay with you struggling to get pickup, but I'm like, these are guys that play soccer. So why do you guys not want to play here over the weekend? If we're back in South America, it's actually hard to get a field. And if you lose that game, there's so many people waiting. You go
Right.
home, you're out, you're done. So I was like, how is it possible that we have a group here on Facebook with 30 to 40 players that actually play soccer and we can't get 15? I just and that's just us because we could also reach out to people in other schools that played against. It's like, hey, let's play some pickup, and it didn't happen. So to me, that was something shocking here because I understand it's more like a cultural thing, but there were players that play soccer. I think there's a little bit of a cultural aspect that maybe we just won't change. I understand that in basketball we have it, but we just don't have it for soccer. But at the same time, there's 30 million Mexican Americans living here, and I'm sure they would take part of this. There's probably a couple million South Americans that live here too, right? I mean,
Well,
we're two of them.
when I do see pickup, because there are some places here isolated here in LA where I see it happening now, and 10 years ago, it's mostly the Latinos just show up and play
Yeah,
the pick on a basketball court. They put their small goals, and who's got next? And like you said, it's badass because you compete and you get better at manipulating certain aspects of the game. Because, like you said, if you lose, if you concede a goal, you're out. So you enjoy it, you try things, you play with your friends, but there's so much more to it, and the mental aspect too. It's not just about getting better in tight spaces. It's I'm a mental monster. I'm a fucking winner. You know what I mean? Because if I don't win, I'm out. And that's another part, that we could dive into in the games, and maybe the problematic things here stateside is not enough competitive games for our players, right? Not enough competitive games.
I have another question for you in regards to all of this. So, in U.S. soccer, you've definitely dealt with this before, and we kind of dealt with this a little bit in the World Cup of a soccer mom, soccer dad moment. And I'm sure every culture has that at different levels, right? At different levels. In the US, because mostly the parents are paying for it, they feel like they have a voice in what the coach does. And I think that's a big problem right there. And I think one of the consequences of that, and I wanted to get your take on this, is sometimes you'll see coaches overcoach. Because, for example, myself, when I'm coaching 7 or 8 year olds, and I talked to Oscar Pareja about this before, the coach of Orlando City, and he always says at that age, you don't really coach them, you let them play. Let them play. And of course, you can create some situations to teach them, but mainly you let them play. The problem is when you do that, a parent thinks you're scamming them sometimes. They're like, oh, you're just putting them to play. Where are the cones? Where are the fancy drills? It's like your child's 8. That's not how you coach them. But they can't really get that because they're paying.
Yeah.
So you get my point. Do you think that overcoaching is an American coach's problem? Or is it a problem of the pressure that parents put on it because most of it is all pay to play outside of like main MLS academies?
Yeah, probably the latter, man. I feel like, man, especially now with how modern day society is going, I feel like a ton of coaches, it's all an act, it's all a facade. People can't even express themselves anymore for fear of getting in trouble, you know what I mean? Or for fear of being labeled an old school coach. But yeah, I get what you're saying at the youth ages. They need to fall in love. They need to enjoy it, not be told what to do left and right, 100%. And as you get older, mom and dad getting involved. I always say the players are never the problem. It's always mom and dad. Always. In 20 plus years doing it here stateside, there's never been, I'll never say never, but 99.9% of the times, it's always the parents, man, that ruin it for the players as well. So it's crazy. It's crazy. And I'm talking about at all levels, Filippo, not just the top MLS Academy level, at the youth levels, at boys, girls, high school, junior high. They're a disaster, dude. And the involvement is over the top. In Brazil, is it like that? Because listen, I was born and raised here. I've been to Argentina 20 times throughout my life, but I'm not there immersed in it to see how it is at the youth levels. Is it like that in Brazil? Mom and
Well,
dad knee
I
deep in it,
didn't
right?
I didn't work there with soccer, right? I played, but I didn't work there. And I played in soccer school, didn't play in academies. I lived far away from wherever Flamengo was, or Fluminense in Xerém, Botafogo, Vasco. Vasco was very far too. So I didn't really work with it to give you any opinion in regards to that. What I do know, talking to players from Brazil, it seems like Brazil, it's less of the parents and it's more about the agents.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of I'm going to say allegedly because I'm not trying to get in trouble here, but there's allegedly a lot of corruption at the youth level with agents bribing coaches here and there to play certain players. Obviously, when you are a Neymar, a Vinicius Jr., it doesn't really matter who your agent is. You're so good that it just doesn't matter. But that's why you see some players that are kind of mediocre sometimes in Brazil make it to big clubs, because at the youth level there is a lot of that. So I think because there's so much money involved there in the Brazilian culture, you're obviously going to have some parents complain, and they'll probably see my son's better than that kid. That kid's playing, but I don't think they have much of an influence on the kid. And there's so many kids playing that if a parent's causing trouble, you just kick him out. It's like, bye. And it's a free academy for the most part, right? From the club,
For sure.
you're not paying. So what voice do you have? You're not paying, dude. Get out. Go to another one. So I
For
think
sure.
that's mainly it, the difference. While here, again, it's like any person, right? If you're paying, you feel like, hey, I'm paying. I'm the
Yeah.
one in charge here.
Yeah.
Um, but I think
I'm
that's one of the issues.
for
I
salary,
wanted
man.
so mainly, I think, is there anything, if you were in charge of U.S. soccer right now? I'm not going to get into promotion relegation. Let's put the way the structure is what it is. It is what it is. You have MLS, you have USL. What would you force them, based on what we talked here in this video, this segment? What would you do or force them to implement? Would you go that route that I said of forcing have futsal academies? Would you branch out, try to get more soccer schools, some of them free? I think one thing that you said is very important. I think these clubs sometimes don't see the long-term investment, that if they invest in a player and they develop those South American talents that we see, you're going to sell them for 20 million, man, easily, easily. And now we're here in MLS trying to struggle to, we sell it for 10 million. It's a massive celebration. You see, like, Palmeiras just sold a 16-year-old Endrick for 60
Yeah.
million euros. That's like it's MLS doesn't sell that in a season. All clubs.
Yeah.
So if they looked at that picture, that they could develop players at that level, plus, I mean, naturally, if that happens, you're going to watch more of the league. I'm going to watch more of the league. So what would you do right now? You, Brian Kleiban, are given the power to change the structure for the long term. What would you try to implement?
No, I think two things are key, Felipe. One, I like your idea. I'll piggyback off your idea of the futsal at the younger ages. More touches, tighter spaces, more decision making, tighter spaces, technique over an 11 game where you touch the ball 10 times over a 70-minute game. Over here, you get 500 touches in tight areas. So it's a no-brainer. I don't know about all clubs, but I know the Galaxy on their tennis courts have just finally, after 10 years, been trying to do it. They finally have built, there's a ton of futsal courts now, which their academy is using, which is huge. So that's one thing. And then the second thing, which is key, Felipe, in my experiences, is getting competitive games and international games. The younger, the better, these experiences for your top talents. Because I'll never forget going to a Dallas Cup tournament. This must have been 10, 12 years ago with a group. You line up and you're going to play Cruzeiro, okay? And you line up for the walkouts. And, our nice, sweet, innocent American boys, wherever their backgrounds are from, they're nice, sweet, and innocent, are lined up and kind of in awe of the moment. And then you have the Cruzeiro guys staring at you like they're going to eat your fucking face, okay?
Because that's
So
what they're going to try to do.
yeah, but I'll never forget it. And after that episode, like, you try to create a culture here within your own training environments. It's hard to duplicate, but you can do it. I've seen 2 or 3 or 4 environments during my time that have been very, very good, where the intensity is top, where you can duplicate it. So when you play those games, it's not a surprise, but you have to actually go and feel it for yourself and experience it for yourself. So our young players need to go and challenge themselves. And I think it's a lot more accessible now than it was before. I think a lot of the academies are traveling overseas where they wouldn't before, but a lot of them are going to Europe. And in Europe, the youth academies and these games are still inundated with nice, sweet, innocent boys, right? It's a lot different when you have to go play against Argentino Juniors or Independiente or River Plate or Flamengo or Flu or Palmeiras or Corinthians. It's different, right? Those guys are trying to survive and get out of their situations and save their families. There's a different hunger and feel to it. And our guys need to be tested so that when they're 15, 16, 17, 18, and they get in a tough game, flashback in their brain. I've been there, done that. I've competed at high levels. I'm not nervous. I'm okay. When you're taking that next step, I don't feel like so many of our youth prospects are ready. So when they get in these environments at the critical ages, they falter, they fail. You know what I mean? I haven't watched much of the U17s. We'll see tonight against Guatemala in a hostile environment against Guatemala how it looks. But again, cookie cutter players, man. They're all very similar. They're all technically infinitely superior to what they were 10 to 15 years ago, right?
Yeah.
You get 100 U17 players, and they're all infinitely superior to their peers 15 years ago, technically, tactically, game models, understanding the game systems. But special players,
Yeah, I think what you're saying essentially is the futsal will help us make a jump on the technical ability of the Americans, go down a little bit of more of that athlete mentality and more of like the technician, the technical guy. And playing international cups, mainly pushing in South America a little bit, will develop a bit of more maybe grit for these guys, right?
but we've always been about the grit. But I need high level, high end grit. So when you step on the field, Filippo, I'll never forget Tab Ramos, who used to run the U20 program, right, for many
Mhm.
cycles. Um, got on the phone with me where a couple of Galaxy players were recommended to him, that Latino players that had never really or weren't had been overlooked for the U17 World Cup. So he's like, "Hey Brian, my coaches are telling me I should call in player X, player Y. Like, why? Tell me why. Like, you didn't take them to the World Cup, and I'm now supposed to call in for U20. Like, why?" And they're trying to finagle why they weren't called or whatever. So he's like, "Brian, listen, let me tell you about the Hispanic player for the most part. Not all, but most. Um, Technically proficient, nice on the ball, confident this, confident that. Great. When you're playing France, you have a monster, profile who comes and crushes you in the first 50-50 divided ball because he's been playing for Lyon's first team. What does that player do after? He hides. You know what I mean? He
Mhm.
goes in a little ball, it curls up, and he hides. Will these players hide? And I was like, listen, oddly enough, that's the only thing I could guarantee you that they will not. You know what I mean? They've seen it, they've done it, they've been in this environment, they've experienced it. So lo and behold, fast forward, player went into the game against France and got subbed into it. And first 50-50 ball, like he delivered the 2-foot tackle, smashed the French guy on the ground crying. And Tap calls me back. He's like, see, this is different. This Latino player I can get with, I can get behind because he has this. You know what I mean? I feel that, and this is probably the wrong word to use, that I don't care, Filippo. Our culture here, which we'll get to that, I guess, in a separate talk, is soft, all the way around, soft.
Mhm.
It's built on grit and determination, but really, are we really?
Well, because I think a lot of U.S. soccer development, youth development, it's more about who can afford to pay the best soccer schools, best coaches, right? Instead of like the player that can actually grind it out. There's not enough opportunities for players that have families that can't afford to be there. It's improved for sure with MLS having free academies, but you just gave examples of Argentina and Brazil where you're going with a kid that joined the team for free just based on his hard work and talent, and he wants to get his family out of poverty, out of a favela, out of whatever, right? So it's very hard to compete with a kid like that when you've had it. I don't want to say easy, but easy somewhat of your life. I lived in Brazil and I lived here, and this country right here, our life is a lot better. Just look, and I'm not here to compare countries. I lived in both. I lived in the U.S. per choice. I can go move back to Brazil. I live in the U.S. because I love this country. I love Brazil too, but
Yeah.
life here is better, in a, easier from a certain standpoint, regardless of who you are here. That's the main thing, and that's what it goes to both countries. And I do think at the youth level in the US, one of the main issues is winning over development, right? Winning a youth trophy sometimes means more to that coach than developing a player, which to me it's wrong. Because you can actually win youth trophies by sometimes playing players that are just bigger, stronger. Because at that level, that makes a difference. But when that player that's bigger and stronger goes play among man, it evens out and his technical abilities right here, it's game over. He's useless. He's not good. So sometimes the little guy or the guy that's very technical, but he's going to get pushed around way too easily. he'll get cut or he just won't play as much in the youth level because the coach wants to win. So, hey, play the kid that at age 15, he's 6 foot tall. Don't play the 5'3" guy. He's too small. He's good, but put that guy and just chug in crosses. He'll get some headers. He'll score. Have you seen that a lot in U.S. soccer? Before we close here.
No, 100%, Filippo. It's a classic example, and it happens across the board, man. The difficult thing is, what's the incentive? Like, what is the incentive of these youth soccer coaches? You know what I mean?
Solidarity payments, maybe?
what is the incentive to play the little diminutive, crafty playmaker who can't run and win headers or duels or run past you, as opposed to the man-child? Like, there's no incentive, right? It's a pay-to-play thing. I better win, otherwise I may be let go, and that's the end of it. You know what I mean? The whole system, which always goes back to the beginning of the conversation, is the problem, right? On that front, scouting is another thing. Scouting is a big problem, which finally now the big clubs or the MLS clubs are starting to see the potential that we can sell players. Yeah, we're not selling Endrick for 60, but it's just getting started here. And the clubs are seeing the potential. So now they're actually a scouting system at some of the clubs. Some of them are just literally in the infant stages of even hiring scouts. And then what are they actually looking for, Filippo? You know what I mean? The big man child that's going to win you games still. MLS clubs still do that, by the way. You know what I mean? Instead of getting the guy that they have a clear profile of what player is going to translate at the next level, their inexperience tells them that they don't know who's going to translate. I lived it firsthand at the Galaxy, where the decision makers had no idea, because of the lack of experience, player X and player Y, who's better and who's going to translate to become a professional and who's not. Nobody has a crystal ball. But at the high level, European clubs and the South American clubs, it's very clear who the top player are in your academy, and everything is catered to those players. I'm talking about specific sessions. It's not about the team. It's not about the team winning the U17 game or the U15 game this weekend. It's the sessions the entire week are geared around the number 7, because he's the one that's going to be a professional player. So all the exercises, all the tactical exercises, one-on-one on the wing with crossing and finishing. Why? Because it's for the Vinicius of the academy, right? We don't do that here. So yes, we just have cookie cutter sessions, our game model, 4-3-3. How are we going to break down this? We don't do it specifically to develop players. And then, I'm sorry, I'm going on tangents. Back to the scouting of it all. I've had this talk with so many people. I don't know if you've heard or agree or disagree. The incentive comes in again. All these DOCs, director of coaches, and all the youth clubs here. I'm sure in Florida, it's a big money maker. These guys are huge salaries. What is their incentive to send their best player to the Galaxy or LAFC or Orlando or Miami? They don't get any monetary reward. They lose their best player. They don't win as much anymore. The parents don't want to pay as much anymore. They go to a different club. They lose money if they send their best player away. So why not an incentive? Instead of hiring a scout and paying them XYZ and the scout can't cover so much territory, why not have the 10 big clubs, youth clubs in your region? Those DOCs are your eyes and ears. They are your scouts. And you incentivize them. When a player signs for Miami FC with their academy, here's a stipend. When they get signed for the second team, another stipend. When they get to sign for, they will be picking up the phone left and right saying, hey, Filippo, I got a player for you. Hey, Filippo, I got a player for you. Hey, Filippo, I got a player for you.
And they're going to want to make that player better to show you how much better they are.
Correct. So it all comes down to incentive, and there's no incentive. So now it's about a competition of poaching. Oh, you're stealing my player. Oh, you didn't come to me. You went straight to the parents. It's a fucking disaster, dude. I know it is overseas. It's competitive as well. But here we don't even want to compete. You're like you said, there's territorial rights. There's all these rules that the player's yours because he's in your territory, even though he's never trained 1 minute in your academy. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? MLS, hey, listen, and I'm not a guy that's here bashing. MLS has its place and is actually moving in the right direction by identifying that this could be a huge financial incentive to develop good players and move them abroad, because it's just the reality. The best football is overseas, just like the NBA is here, and the best players from Europe want to come and play in the NBA. Well, the best football is overseas. You know what I mean? It's just the reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, they have to look into solidarity payments from FIFA, because that can help clubs too, because any future sale, the clubs that developed get a tiny percentage. So for the clubs at a smaller level, that's a lot of money, right? I'm pretty sure River Plate's always going to make money when Enzo is sold because of solidarity payments, right? But enough for this segment. I think we can wrap things up here by saying any parent that has a son or a daughter too, I think this applies to both, but obviously in these videos, we're more focused on men's soccer because that's what we usually cover. But what we'll tell parents before we wrap things up in this episode is if you have a child and you want them to play soccer, get them at early ages to play futsal, let them play a lot of pickup. Don't overcoach. It's not about cones. It's not about drills. Let them play at the U10 level. After that, find the most competitive environment possible for them to play and develop. Brian, thank you very much here for the episode for this segment. And you guys can join us on segment 2, which we're going to talk about U.S. soccer culture, which is different from what we just talked about. Thanks for watching, everyone. Drop a like before you go. Bye-bye.